Right. As we like to say on this show, according to Wikipedia, if they win this weekend, Ballyhale Shamrocks will have won half of the Kilkenny senior hurling titles this century. That's 11 for you out there if you can't count. I'm delighted to say Paul Murphy is with us to help preview a game which I think is going to slowly capture the imagination, but certainly over the next 24 hours or so, people are going to start tuning into. Paul, that's a level of dominance from Ballyhale that we very rarely see. 50% success rate in county championships over 2 decades. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. And I think, Ger, this team, particularly over the last 5 or 6 years, when you saw the likes of Michael Fennelly and Henry Shefflin, these lads kind of stepping aside, and maybe even a few of the more experienced players getting older, there was maybe talk 5-6 years ago that, around now, this team won't be as dominant. So, their achievement to be going for 5 in a row in Kilkenny and the continued success and the likes of Adrian Mullen, Noam Cody and these players coming through, it's just, it's a remarkable achievement just from a really remarkable club who are only in existence for 50 years.
What do you put it down to? Obviously the quality of players that they've had and the backbone of the Fennellys at club level and Henry and the Shefflins wider, that was a sensational group to be able to draw on. But what is it about? Is it a style of play? Is it a physicality? Is it something that they have that kind of separates them when it comes down to it? Is it just a winning mentality?
Yeah, it's a little bit of everything. I would say the most important things they have going for them, though, is the community they have down there, and there has to be a belief. It's one thing being a big physical player, it's one thing having a few players that are very skillful and all these things, but their mentality is just they never believe they're ever beaten in a game. If a team are lucky enough to go ahead against Ballyhale, they don't ever believe they're beaten, but they also have a great trait of a team of successful teams where when they go ahead, they just turn the screw. Now, unfortunately, in the Club All-Ireland last year, they didn't get over the line. It was one of the rare examples where we see this with Ballyhale. But they just have a great mentality. But like I said, the community down there, they have a great spirit in the community, and kind of, I suppose, touching on what things like Brian would say of spirit. But, if you go down to Ballyhale Shamrocks, they don't have incredible facilities. They have very good facilities. They have, dressing rooms and 2 pitches. But it's not a case of that, they have this incredible setup that there's players just coming off a conveyor belt. It has to come from the community that the players down there are just immersed in hurling, that they have players coming through. And, very much to like what people say around Kilkenny, you see players going around or young fellas going around with hurls in their hand. Go down to Ballyhale and that's nearly twofold. They just love it down there, and they love winning, and they love the journey of the whole thing, be it a county final or a Club All-Ireland.
Yeah, it's funny, the team in the noughties was obviously different from the team in the last 5 years. They did 4 in a row. This current team has done 4 in a row as well. And is there if I was to put 2 videotapes of the 2 teams side by side, would they look the same? Is there something that you could say that's a Ballyhale way of playing?
No, I wouldn't say so, to be honest. The big thing about it, and you could even say it for Limerick as well at the moment, is just they can mix it up. They don't really care what way you play. There is a few things with Ballyhale. I mean, if you look at them, any person who goes to, let's say, we'll talk about the current Ballyhale team, they'll work the ball out short and they'll have options coming forward. And you see the likes of, they've Owen Cody and Adrian Mullen, these lads, coming out from the half-forward line, and TJ, coming looking for the ball. And if they come looking for it and they're tightly marked, well, the ball just goes in over the head, and you have the anchor inside at full forward, Colin Fennelly, who will get that ball, take on his man, usually draw a foul, because the man knows if he gets through, Colin will bat the ball into the net and score a goal. And if not, he has runners off the shoulder. He has Adrian, he has Owen Cody, he has great forwards off the shoulder. So they just have so many options that if you think that you're going to go out and mark TJ Reid and that's going to stop them, it's not. If you think if you keep the half forward line quiet enough, Adrian, Owen and TJ, it's still not enough, because they have players flooding through from midfield, from half back, and then they have the depth inside in the full forward line. So they can mix it up whatever way you want to mix it. And then, very basically, they have great physicality. If you think you're going to outmuscle them, you can't. They're so physically strong. So it's the ability to play whatever way you want to play. And if you're a team going playing against them, you can't just go, right, well, if we do this, we'll get around them. It's not as simple as that.
It's an inter-county forward line playing in club hurling as well, when you name it off there. And I'd say, I'm sure Colin Fennelly's really let himself go, I'd say.
Yeah, I think I've been at a good few of their matches now, and the talking crowd is just seeing how physically strong Colin looks. I mean, myself and Colin are the same age, but he still seems to be improving in terms of strength, and I suppose he realises now as well that he is such a focal point for them in the full forward line, that if they knock in that traditional long ball and if he catches it, there's not a full-back, in the country that can maybe can match him physically, but they're not going to dominate him. But he's in great shape, and he just does this job so well for them. And there's very few forwards in the country, even at inter-county level, that you can say does the Colin Fennelly job. It's nearly something at this stage, a job description that you can say Colin Fennelly has nearly defined this position in the way he plays it.
So I don't know if it's mind games or not, but Jackie Taylor was out this week saying that Derek Lynn could do worse than trying to coax Colin Fennelly back in. Is that, you talk your direct opponent up, you get in their head before the big game? Is Jackie going out there and doing a job on behalf of James Stephens?
I don't think so. If we're talking about traits with Ballyhale, the one thing I would say for them is they don't let the feet come off the ground. They enjoy what they do. They don't seem to get, this ego thing of listening to what everyone is saying. I mean, if they did, they would have lost a long time ago. Jackie might just actually really make a point there. He might be making an attempt, I suppose, to distract from the occasion and do James Stephens a favour. But I don't think if Colin Fennelly hears that it puts him off his game on Sunday. That's not the way Ballyhale lads approach it. And there's so many, I suppose, if you want to call them distractions around the game. I don't think something like that will distract from Colin Fennelly or make him do his job any less than he normally does it. So it may be a attempt by Jackie, or it may be just, something that Jackie has seen that, in fairness, he might actually be thinking that, Derek Lynn could call him in because you're not going to expect Colin Fennelly to run 10 kilometres in a game. You want a man to hold up the ball. So it may be just a very valid point, and there mightn't be any malice in it by Jackie by saying that.
Is there, I was going to ask, is there a possibility that actually what happens now is that some players who left might be considered, that there is a genuine clean slate, even though Derek Lynn was part of that setup, that actually, if he's going to be his own man, and I've no doubt that he will be, that something like that might be something that he is genuinely considering? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, when the changeover came, one of the first things I was thinking was the likes of, Ger Gilroy, who's hurling for Ballyhale. I think Ger is only maybe 29, just gone 30. Ger is hurling really well, and he's a man who's in savage physical condition as well. And he's certainly a player. If Derek Lynn picked up the phone, like that he could go and tog out for Kilkenny this year and do a job in corner forward, absolutely. And maybe, at the time, it was just something that Ger said, this isn't for me at the moment, I'm going to move on. And maybe now he has changed. The likes of Liam Blanchfield as well. There's several players there who have hurled for Kilkenny over the years who have stepped away and potentially now may look at, okay, well, this may be a new setup that I may serve a function in, and as long as I have the hurling and I have the fitness, potentially, yeah, that may happen. And, I do think Derek may pick up the phone to a few players that maybe fell out of favour, or maybe just, didn't, I suppose, make a big impression. Well, not to say didn't make a big impression, but maybe towards the end of their career, just weren't getting on teams and have improved their hurling since they went back to the club, which does happen. So it is a very strong possibility that Derek will be looking at all options, and this is now a good opportunity for that to happen.
Yeah, and no better shop window than a county final like this, particularly up against a James Stephens side who have their own incredible story this year. Like the team that you've listed off, right? Very few club teams in the country can live with them, as we've seen. They're like an all-time great team, and it took a last-second incredible wonder goal last year to stop them being the reigning All-Ireland champions. The fact that they've come back so quickly to be right back at it the next year, that speaks to the character of everybody involved. On the opposite sideline, Brian Cody. Like in the middle of the season, Brian Cody has joined the management team. I don't know what kind of a role he's in. Like, is he just giving team talks? Is he like assistant manager? What's his? Does he have an official title? Is he minister without portfolio? What's going on here?
I don't know. Is there an exact title for it? I think he's. I suppose if being a presence on the sideline is a title that could be best defined what his job is. Look, James Stephens earlier in the year. Look, they were in relegation semi-final once the league was over. So they were struggling to find a bit of form. They were in a very tough group, and they played teams who were moving really well. In the league, and maybe look, just James Stephens weren't hitting the form they would have liked to be hitting. And then look, I suppose once the inter-county, now that we have the split season, inter-county's over, and Brian, who's always obviously been invested in the club, maybe saw that there was a role for him, or maybe the management just saw, if we bring a fresh voice in, and who better than Brian to bring in terms of motivation and maybe clearing up a few of the things for players. Like players might have been lacking a little bit of confidence, players might have been struggling that way, and Brian is a great motivator that way. So it certainly wouldn't harm anybody's backroom staff bringing him in, but it seems to have steadied the ship. Going from a relegation semi-final, Beating Bennettsbridge then in the quarter-final, and then beating Dixborough, who only bet them a few weeks ago in the league. They have turned it around and they've built up a bit of momentum. If someone asked you 8 weeks ago, will James Stephens be in the county final? You would have had to say no, they wouldn't. But I would certainly say that Brian would have had an influence in that he maybe just steadied the ship a small bit. They have the players, certainly. They just maybe needed to I suppose, steer the ship in a different direction for a small bit, just to get the confidence back up. But whatever has happened, it seemed to work, and Brian seems to be a big part of it. He's not standing back on the line. He's involved, and he's shouting into players. So he is involved. Yeah.
Because you can't really invite Brian Cody in and have him sitting quietly in the background, or like you sit on the bench there, and it's like once you're in, you're in.
Yeah. Well, that's it. And I think Brian would have respected the role that he wasn't going in and going to be manager. And I don't think he needed that. He doesn't need the title of manager. But I think, Brian would have looked at this and said, if it's in the best interest of James Stephens that I step in, that I'm going to be a benefit, not a distraction, well, then absolutely I'll do it. And it seems to have worked. And again, look, Brian at this stage, Brian doesn't need to be, not to say he doesn't serve under anybody, but sometimes, with managers trying to join teams or go in with someone as a coach, there can be this thing of who's in charge and so on. But Brian doesn't need that. Brian would be very much there to, I suppose, drive this team on, give any bit of insight he can to the management team as well, which he's now part of. And really, I suppose, there's, like you said, they struggle to find exactly the defined role, but maybe there's no defined role here. Maybe it's motivation and see what I can bring to this setup that will improve the setup.
Who are the leaders of this James Stephens team that people will be familiar with?
So obviously Cian Kenny, has had a great year for Kilkenny this year. Was really impressive in the All-Ireland semi-final against Clare, got 1-2. He's hurling at centre-back for them. So obviously he was up around forwards, even midfield for a lot of the year. And look, a player who will always get on the ball. Not probably an out-and-out defender that traditionally we would think, because we've seen him play more midfield and forwards. But he's getting on a lot of ball for the half back line. Niall Brazel as well would also be was in with Kilkenny for a good few years, still is involved. He's hurling really well for them at centre forward. He's on the freeze, and he's getting a lot of scores from play, and makes a real nuisance of himself for defences. So Niall is hurling really well in sports, and Conor Brown is probably really the main man in terms of what Conor brings to it. Huge energy, gets on a lot of ball, and is really a man, I suppose, that you could give him a lot of jobs. I wouldn't be surprised on Sunday to see, okay, Cian Kenny is centre back, but Conor Brown's going to take up TJ Reid because he has the legs, and he's just going to try and cut TJ out of the game potentially. Or they may see a job for him with Adrian Mullen, because Adrian has been covering huge ground. So they have. James Stephens have lots of players there that are really good players and have been tested at the highest level. So, the likes of your Cian Kenny, Niall Brazel and Conor Brown would be, your most noteworthy players within the group.
Ballyhale beat Tullerone. It was only 4 points in the end. Was that a close game, or did the scoreboard flatter Tullerone? What kind of a semi-final was that?
Yeah, no, Tullerone gave them a good game, in fairness. At the start of this championship, I kind of looked and I said, Tullerone are probably the team best described with a bit of devilment in them to go at Ballyhale. Some teams when they play Ballyhale can nearly get shell-shocked early on and not perform. And we've seen that with a few teams this year, but Tullerone wouldn't be a team like that. If anything, Tullerone would rise to the occasion. They hurled really well. It didn't flatter them at all. To be honest, I think Tullerone would have felt they could have taken a few more of their chances and been more within touching distance of Ballyhale. Ballyhale just played it really well. They absorbed what Tullerone were throwing at them and then just hit them for scores. Tullerone had to work a lot harder for their scores, which, I think any player for Tullerone would tell you that that's not me, I suppose, making an observation. You have to work a lot harder generally than Ballyhale do to get their scores. Ballyhale just had too many threats all over the pitch, and it's just, if any person was around Kilkenny or is around Kilkenny over the weekend, go and watch Ballyhale, particularly for the likes of what I saw in the semi-final against Tullerone. Adrian Mullen and Cody, what they're doing at club level is just really incredible. It's a joy to watch. Their movement, the skill that they're doing, and they're nearly untouchable when they're in that form. And those two lads in particular against Tullerone were really the difference for me, because they just got on so much ball, and when they got on the ball, it was very hard to dispossess them, and they were pulling so many strings. But look, Tullerone gave them a great game. I think a lot of people would have been, I suppose, not tipping Tullerone, but maybe the neutrals would have supported Tullerone because they're the underdog. Tommy and all the Welches there, they have a great spirit in the club. And if there was a team to topple them, I think a lot of people would have looked at Tullaroan. But no, the scoreboard didn't flatter Tullaroan at all. They gave it a good crack. It's just Ballyhale were just too strong for them on the day.
I presume Ballyhale are quite strong favourites for this game.
Yeah. Like, I mean, it's no offence to James Stephens, but look, any team going for 5 in a row and not showing signs of slowing down, you'd have to say, are the favourites. Again, James Stephens' run to the final, coming from the relegation semi-final. Again, it wasn't flawless. Where if you look at Ballyhale's run into the final, they were just dominating teams. Beat Clara really well. Bet Tullaroan were the league champions, won the league, scoring 28 points from playing the final. I mean, just incredible stuff. And romped home in the final against Bennettsbridge in the league final. Ballyhale just go out and turn them over because it's championship, and this is what Ballyhale do.
Yeah.
So I think anybody who says that James Stephens are favourites, and that's no offence to James Stephens, and I think they're happy enough going in as not being tipped because they can have a good crack at Ballyhale, but it's just hard to see where it's going to come from for Ballyhale. But hopefully a great match, and hopefully James Stephens go at it, and I've no doubt they will.
What does Derek Ling, what has he learned from this year's club championship? Are there any other players apart from the kind of older crew who might come back in? Is there anybody who's slightly out of a little bit off Broadway, maybe, who hasn't been heralded, who's put their hands up over the course of the championship, that he might be thinking, okay, I'm going to get you in over the next couple of months, winter well, and we'll see how you go in the springtime?
Yeah, I think look, there's been so many games, and certainly lots of players have been putting the hand up. I think what a great benefit Derek already has, I suppose, is from the under-20s, having won the All-Ireland with them. Now gets to go back and have a look at them, not even a year on, but 6 months on, and see how they led their club. Have they, performed really well? Have they maybe taken a step back, which is no panic, but he'll be looking for that. He'll also be looking for, this is, like we said earlier, very much a clean slate for Kilkenny, and, for players out there who maybe felt they didn't get a look in with the Kilkenny panel over the last few years. I'm talking about players in the club who thought that I might have got a call at the start of the year. From what I understand, Derek is casting the net wide. I've seen him at every match, himself and his backroom team at every match in Nolan Park, and they've been I suppose splitting up and going to different games, and we've seen them around. So they are casting the net far and wide. There's not many players, I suppose, outside of the names that we would expect from the under-20, and even players who've been in around the panel over the last few years that have really, been outstanding. But there certainly has been players who've put their hand up, and Derek will look at them and go, this fella could do a job, and we bring him in and see how he reacts to, training with Kilkenny early on, Walsh Cup, even a bit of a league. So there certainly are lads there who are putting a hand up. But to say there's been any players that have been absolutely outstanding, that this fella now is going to come from absolutely nowhere into a Kilkenny team, there hasn't been any of that. But those players will be few and far between anyway.
This Tullaroan team, I think, kind of shot to national prominence, obviously, when they won their intermediate All-Ireland. Maybe it's a very clear sign of just how strong hurling at club level is, when you can have an intermediate team go and make their burst for glory, and then be within 4 points of the team who's like one of the best teams of all time in the semi-final. Am I right in saying that it does feel like the club scene at the moment is as good as it's been in a long time in Kilkenny, or am I reading too much into that?
No, it certainly is. One thing that we would have said over the years, and it's very unusual that you don't hear a complaint about club hurling and the structures of club hurling in a county. But I don't think many people around Kilkenny will be complaining with the structures. We only have senior, intermediate and junior. And then obviously you have your junior leagues, then the junior A, B, Cs. But, obviously with other counties, they have lots more clubs, and they have to facilitate those by having intermediate A or premier intermediate. And then you have and different things. And I suppose the waters can kind of get murky there in terms of understanding, well, what does that mean for the calibre of team you have? What we have seen over the last 20 years in Kilkenny is the teams that have come up from junior have performed really well at intermediate, that they're not out of their depth, and they're competing at really hard. And likewise, teams have stepped up from intermediate, and Tullaroan being a good example. Tullaroan have won the league in senior, which, okay, they won the county final, but that's a savage achievement for a team that were intermediate a few years ago.
Yeah.
But likewise, we saw Lisdowney, who came up 2 years ago, really good team, performed really well last year, were relegated this year, and they're a really good team. So I think, any team coming up from intermediate is hoping to avoid Lisdowney next year. So any team that's going down out of senior, for example, is a really good team. There's no teams there that you're saying, they got away with it. You don't get away 1 year in Kilkenny hurling bad at club level, which is great. That's the kind of competition you want. So it is really healthy. And, you see the competitions. I would say that any team intermediate on their day is capable of beating, 6 of the teams or 7 of the teams who are senior on another day, because that's the kind of, I think, the fine line that a lot of counties in hurling or football are looking for. You want that competition to be really close, and I think that's what we kind of have and still have. So it's great at the moment in Kilkenny.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed we get a good game in the final. There's one last thing I think we should mention. Paul Shefflin obviously passed away earlier in the year, and it's very difficult to know from a club's perspective how much you talk about that in the build-up to big matches like this, because you don't want to put unfair pressure on a team or on players. We have a piece later on this evening with John O'Keefe and Jimmy Marr, who were teammates of Dylan Quirks and were playing in the game in which he passed away earlier this year, and they said one of the things that they didn't want to do was to keep talking about trying to win it for him, because it just wasn't fair. Now, I'm sure for individuals it will be, but I think far more importantly, I've no doubt that the club will remember him this week in their thoughts in the build up to it, given he was such a stalwart of the club and so important for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I completely understand, obviously with Dylan Quirk and Paul Shefflin, they're huge tragedies, and the reaction of the GA communities around them, look, albeit it's not going to, completely replace what was lost, but I'm sure it's a comfort to the families in some way when you see the reaction. And I can understand what players and club mentors and supporters would be saying, that you don't want to constantly draw on that, because it's nearly also unfair in the team, I think, in some ways, that you feel that, because it mightn't work out and you mightn't win, that in some way you've let Dylan Quirk or Paul Shefflin down by doing that. That's never going to be the case, but it's always going to be a motivation for you, because these things are very tough. They're very tough situations to be in. But, of course, you draw on the spirit of that person when they were in the dressing room motivated the team. They've been part of so many victories, and you carry that with you into these matches. So it's understandable that you don't want to hang everything on it, because, you want to go out and you want to win for that person, but you also don't want to make it feel like that it's a burden on the team, that if, it's going to hold you down, or if you lose, that in some way you didn't do it justice. So certainly Ballyhale, they absolutely will draw on it. They had another bereavement lately enough, Angela O'Sullivan, who would be Sean O'Sullivan's wife. She's a Danes Fort girl. I would have known her. That was another bereavement lately that, again, would pull the community together in Ballyhale. And like I said, I was at Paul Shefflin's funeral, and the sense of community they have is really remarkable. And they really do, in good times and bad times, come together. So I've no doubt that on Sunday, Paul Shefflin will be remembered, but Ballyhale will be going out to do a job, and that's what Paul would have wanted. That's what the Shefflin family, I'm sure, would want. And win or lose, Paul will be remembered. And, if they do win, certainly that'll be a big moment for them since the passing of Paul Shefflin, and dedicated to him.
Yeah, no doubt. Paul Murphy, great to have you with us. Thanks a million. Enjoy the game. Cheers.
Thanks very much, Ger.